The Hesh did not hate the world. They weighed it, found it wanting, and began the long, patient work of taking it apart. Cass Reyes watched them do it from the lip of a dead overpass, lying flat in the rust-colored dust with a salvage glass pressed to one eye. 3 kilometers out, the harvest tower walked. That was the word the old people used. Walked, though it never lifted a foot. It drifted on a cushion of blue light, a spire of mirrored facets the size of a stadium, and beneath it the ground simply stopped being ground. Soil, rebar, the bones of a town called Mercy that had stood 200 years. All of it lifted in a slow gray column into the underside of the tower, sorted, indexed, gone. The Hesh did not burn what they took. They did not waste. They incorporated. By morning there would be a smooth glass scar where Mercy had been, and the tower would have grown a little larger. And somewhere in its lattice, the atoms that had been a church, a water tank, and 400 human beings would be filed under their proper headings. Soft stock, the Hesh called people. Cass had seen the catalog once, scrolling across a recovered slate in letters that hurt to look at. Soft stock, high water content, moderate mineral yield, negligible structural value, recoverable. She lowered the glass. Behind her, in the shadow of the overpass, Evan was praying or maybe just breathing hard. With Evan it was hard to tell. He was 60 and built like a folded ladder, and he had spent 11 years on a Hesh processing line before he cut the collar off his own neck with a grinding wheel and ran. Burn scar still ringed his throat like a second, uglier mouth. Mercy's gone, she said. Mercy was gone the day they painted the index on it. Evan didn't open his eyes. We should move before the skimmers come down to sweep for runners. Cass didn't move. She pressed a hand flat against her own belly, under the patched leather and the alien plating grafted there, and felt it again. The wrongness she had been feeling for 3 weeks now. A drain. Body's stolen systems pulling power toward something low and central, like a town browning out because some new machine had been wired into the grid in the dark. She was built, half out of Harvest Tech herself. They'd had her on a line once too when she was 19, and grafted enough of their hardware into her spine and her gut to keep her alive and working before she'd gotten loose. She knew the feeling of her own body. This was new. Something's wrong with me, she said. Evan opened his eyes. Doc Edeline kept her clinic in the bottom of a grounded cargo hauler, half buried in a dune, with a curtain of bottle caps strung across the door to tell her when the wind changed. She was the last real doctor in 300 kilometers, and she charged in water and silence, and never in questions. She had Cass stripped to the waist, and lie on a table that had once been a freezer door, and she ran a scavenged Hesh diagnostic wand the length of her, frowning, and then ran it again, slower, and her frown changed into something Cass had never seen on her before. Lie still, Edeline said. I need to listen to something. She put a cup against Cass's belly, against the plating, and then against the bare skin below it, and held very still for a long time, and the bottle caps clinked in the doorway, and outside a generator coughed and caught. When Edeline straightened up, her eyes were wet and furious at being wet. How long since you bled? She said. I don't. Not since the line. They burned that out of me along with everything else. You're sure? I'm sure, Doc. What is it? Is it the rot? There was a rot you could get where the graft met the meat, a black creep the Hesh hardware couldn't seal, and it killed slow and it killed everyone it found. Cass had watched her own mother go that way, and had made a kind of peace with going the same. Edeline laughed, cracked and disbelieving, half a sob. It's not the rot. She took Cass's hand and laid it flat, where the cup had been, pressed her own over it, and waited. There, wait, there, and Cass felt it. Under the plating, under the scar tissue, under everything they had done to her, a second pulse, small. Fast as a bird's, not hers. That's not possible, Cass said. Her voice didn't sound like her own. They sterilized me. They sterilized everybody. That's the whole, that's how it works. We don't make more of us. We can't. That's why they keep the lines fed off the camps. I know how it works. Edeline's hands were shaking. I have not seen this in 19 years. I did not think I would see it again before I died. You are pregnant, Cass. The graft didn't take it all. Or your body grew around what they did and found a door. I don't know. I have stopped pretending I know what your kind can't do. She wiped her eyes hard with the heel of her hand. You are going to make a person. First in this whole dead valley in 19 years. Cass lay on the freezer door and stared at the rusted ceiling and felt the small, fast pulse under her hand. And for the first time since she was 19, she was afraid of dying. Not because of the dying, because of what the dying would take with it now. She should have known they would feel it. The HFY ran their scanners off resonance. They read the world the way a person reads a struck bell, by what hums back. And there was a new thing humming inside Cass now. A frequency that had not existed in the valley for 19 years. A note with no entry in their archive. They could not have understood it, but they could hear it. An off-ledger signal, a glitch in the long, smooth song of the harvest. The skimmer came at dusk while she was still arguing with Evan about which way to run. It dropped out of the burnt sky without sound. They never made sound. That was the worst of them. A flat mirrored disc that hung over Edeline's buried hauler and unfolded a column of the sorting light, that same patient blue. Cass was outside hauling water. Evan was inside. The light touched the dune and the dune began, gently, to come apart. Sand lifting in a slow spiral, and Cass screamed Edeline's name, and the curtain of bottle caps lifted into the air one by one and chimed all the way up into the dark. She got Edeline out. She did not get the clinic out. She and Evan dragged the old doctor up the back of the dune, while behind them the hauler unstitched itself thread by thread. The freezer door table, the diagnostic wand, 11 years of saved water, all of it spiraling up calm and bright into the disk's underside, to be filed under its proper heading. The light swung toward them across the sand, and then it stopped. It held them in its edge. Cass could feel the pull of it on the plating in her spine, a deep, horrible tug, like the universe deciding it wanted her bones back, and then it changed. Did not seize, it examined. The blue narrowed to a needle and traced her, throat to gut, and lingered low and central where the second pulse was. And Cass felt the thing on the far side of that light go very, very still. The way a man goes still when he sees something he has no word for. The skimmer did not take her. It rose, folded, and slid away north toward the harvest tower, fast with the urgency of a thing carrying news. Evan was the one who said it, flat, the scar at his throat working. It didn't kill you. No. It tagged you. It went to tell someone. He looked at her belly the way you'd look at a live grenade. Cass, you just became the most valuable thing on this planet. They can copy anything, take a city apart, and build a better one out of the parts. They can't do that. He pointed, hand unsteady. Nobody can but us. And they just found out one of us still can. They told her about the cradle that night, by a fire built down in a culvert where the light wouldn't show. Edeline knew the way. She had sent the dying there before. The ones too broken to fix, so they'd have somewhere soft to finish. It was a settlement, she said, 3 days east into the slag flats, built in the throat of an old strip mine, where the canyon walls confused the HFY resonance scanners. People there were the leftovers of the leftovers, runners and line cutters, and a few stubborn pure stock who'd never been caught, all hiding under a stolen scatterfield that smeared their hum into the noise of the dead earth. They called it the cradle because somebody, long ago, had a sense of humor about hope. Nothing had ever been born there. It was just a place where things waited to end quietly. And now you're going to walk in there carrying the one thing the whole sky is hunting, Evan said. They'll throw you out. Then they'll throw me out, Cass said. Doc can't make this baby in a dune. I need walls. I need her. She looked at Edeline. Will you come? The old woman looked into the fire for a long time. I have delivered the dead for 19 years, she said finally. I would like to deliver one live thing before I go. Yes, I'll come. God help us all. I'll come. The slag flats nearly killed them before the HFY got the chance. 3 days, Edeline had said, and it was 3 days the way a sentence is 3 words when you don't have to say them with a broken jaw. The flats were the floor of a sea the harvest had drunk dry, a cracked black glaze that held the day's heat into the night and threw it back at them, no cover anywhere. They walked at night and lay up under thermal tarps by day, and the second pulse drank Cass's stolen power faster and faster, so that by the second night her left leg, the grafted one, began to drag, the servos browning out as her body shunted everything it had to the small fast thing in her belly. It's eating me, she said, not bitter, just stating it, lying under the tarp while Evan worked his thumbs into the dead meat of her calf. Funny, they built me to feed them. I feed it instead. That's the Most human thing I ever heard, Evan said. On the third night, the harvesters found their trail. Not the tower. The tower was slow. These were ground units, the ones the runners called recyclers, sent down off the spire to fetch what the tower could not be bothered to walk to. Cass saw their lights far back across the flats, a string of cold blue stars moving in formation, and she knew formation meant intent. And intent meant they had been told exactly what they were fetching. 6 of them. And out ahead, riding point on a salvaged human ground cycle, because it amused him to use our tools against us, came the one the cradle would later teach her to fear by name. His designation was a chord, a thing 3 notes deep that no human throat could shape, so the line runners had done what desperate people do. They'd looked at the dead human signage the harvesters hung off their chassis like trophies, scavenged plates and street names and shop fronts, and they'd named him after the rusted nameplate bolted across his sorting array. Llewellyn. A furniture maker's sign, some said. Cass never learned the truth of it. By the time Shees met him, the name had stopped being a joke. He was Hesh, and the Hesh were beautiful the way a knife is beautiful. His lattice had grown for centuries, accreting matter into a tall, faceted body the color of oil on water, and through it you could see the slow internal weather of his thinking. Light moving from facet to facet in patterns that meant nothing to a human and everything to him. He did not walk like the tower, he rode. He had bent his glittering bulk over a human's machine because the irony pleased some part of a mind that had stopped, long ago, finding anything genuinely new to please it. Him came Jocko, a human name too, hung on a thing that had once been a human, a line frame reconditioned into a servitor, broad as a door, its eyes long since filed away and replaced with sorting optics. Jocko carried Llewellyn's trophies on a yoke across its shoulders. Some of them still moved. Cass and Evan and Edeline in the open. 2 hours from the canyon mouth, with the cradle's confusing walls, a black line on the horizon, and no way to reach it in time. Cass turned to face them because there was nothing else to do. Llewellyn dismounted. The cycle settled. He came across the slag toward her, unhurried, and when he spoke, it was not with a mouth. The Hesh had no mouths, but through the air itself, the facets of his body chiming a pressure into her chest that her brain translated, sluggish and unwilling, into something like words. Carry on unindexed asset, the chiming said. Production of novel biological stock. This has no entry. He drifted closer, and the light in him quickened, and Cass understood with a lurch that what she was seeing was not greed. It was need. A hunger older and worse than greed. The ledger has been complete for 400,000 of your years. Do not make. We recover. We refine. We do not make. He stopped an arm's length from her, towering, his oil-slick body, throwing her own tiny flange back 100 times over. You make. The process is not in the ledger. I will have it. I will open you, and I will find the entry that is missing. You want to know how we do it, Cass said. Her dead leg was screaming. She kept her voice flat. Open me up and read the instructions. Yes. Doesn't work like that. And here, she'd think of this later, in the dark, in the worst of it. Here, she almost laughed, because the thing was so old and so vast and so sure, and it had spent 400,000 years taking the universe apart to see how it worked, and it had never once understood the only thing that mattered. You can't recover it, you can't refine it, it isn't a part. You'd have to do the one thing your whole kind forgot how to do. She lifted her chin. You'd have to make it yourself, and you can't. The light in Llewellyn stopped moving. It was only for a second. Cass had been watching it move the whole time, that ceaseless internal weather. And now it stopped, every facet gone still, and cold at once. And she understood she had said a true thing, and that it had landed somewhere a true thing was not supposed to be able to land in a creature like him. Then the weather started again, faster, angrier, and the cord he threw at her chest had an edge to it now, the closest the Hesh came to rage. Take them, Llewellyn said. And the canyon answered him. Cass never learned all their names. There wasn't time, and afterward, there weren't enough of them left to ask. The cradle had been watching the flats for 3 days. They watched everything. It was how they stayed alive. And when 6 recycler units, and the one they'd named Llewellyn, came over the horizon in formation, the people of the cradle did the calculus they had done 100 times before. And then, for reasons Cass would spend the rest of her life grateful for, and never quite understanding, they did the opposite of what it told them. Team, they came out. Out of the canyon mouth came a rolling junk cart with a coil gun bolted to its bed. A dozen figures fanning out behind it in the dark. And at the front of them all, a tall, pure-stock woman with white hair, shaved to the skull, and a long scavenge rail rifle held loose across her arms like she'd been born with it there. Her name was Oba. She ran the cradle in the loose way the place was run, which was that people did what Oba did because Oba was usually right and always first. She put herself between Llewellyn and Cass without slowing down, and she looked the harvester up and down, all 4 meters of glittering oil-slick height. And she spat on the slag. "You're a long way off your tower, Tinker," Oba said. Cass had heard people defy the Hesh before. She'd done it herself an hour ago, with her dead leg dragging, and nothing left to lose. She had never heard it done like this. Easy, almost bored. A woman declining an offer she found tedious. It did something to the dozen figures behind Oba. It straightened them. "Novel stock," Llewellyn chimed. "The female and her product are the property of the ledger. Stand aside and your settlement will be processed in order, without priority. Interfere and you will be processed now. Just in order." Oba glanced back at her people, and a couple laughed, low and ugly. The laugh of folks who'd been promised order their whole lives by things that meant the grave. "He says he'll do us slow if we hand her over. Quick if we don't." She turned back. "Tell you what I never understood about your kind. You've been taking this world apart 400 years and still ain't figured out we'd rather go quick." Then she shot Jocko's left knee out from under it. The rail rifle's crack rolled across the flats like the world cracking, and the reconditioned servitor lurched and went down on one side, the yoke of trophies spilling across the slag. And after that there was no more talking. There was only the long, bright, terrible noise of people who had decided to die well, doing it badly and bravely in the dark. They got Cass into the canyon. That was the thing that mattered, and it cost them. The coil gun on the junk cart bought the first 30 seconds, hammering blue-white slugs into the lead recyclers, and they came apart in showers of glittering facet. But there were 6, and the coil gun overheated on the 3rd, and Cass, half carried by Evan, with Oba's people closing a ragged wall around her, looked back once and saw the junk cart and its gunner go up in a slow blue spiral, indexed and lifted into the dark, the gunner screaming all the way up until the screaming was filed under its proper heading and stopped. They ran her up the canyon throat, in the dark, through the confusing walls where the scatterfields smeared their hum, and behind them, the recyclers slowed and lost the trail and fell to picking the dead off the slag. Llewellyn did not pick the dead. He sat his stolen cycle at the foot of the canyon and turned his still cold weather up toward the dark where she had gone, and she felt the attention of him on her, like a hand on the back of her neck. He would be patient. He had 400,000 years of patience and one missing entry in his ledger, and now he knew exactly where it was. The cradle was a wound in the earth that people had decided to live in. The old strip mine went down in terraces, ring on ring, and on every ring the leftovers of the leftovers had built their lives out of what the Hesh hadn't wanted. Shipping containers, hauler husks, tarp and cable, and the salvaged guts of dead machines. Fires smudged the dark. Child. There were children, pure stock children, born before the sterilizing, the youngest 9 and feral, watched Cass come down the terraces with enormous eyes. Up at the canyon's mouth, on a gantry of welded scaffold, the scatterfield generator hummed and sparked, a thing the size of a truck cobbled together over decades, the only reason any of them were alive. It was failing. Cass could hear it failing. A hitch in its hum, a stutter, that the engineers around it watched the way you watch a sick child breathe. They did not throw her out. She'd been braced for it the whole way down. She'd rehearsed the begging. Oba. Blood splashed, 3 of her people dead on the flats behind her and not yet cold. Walked Cass to the deepest, warmest ring of the mine, sat her down, sent for blankets, looked at her belly a while, then looked at her face. "Doc says you're carrying," Oba said. "Just 1 in 19 years. That's what they tell me." Oba nodded slowly. She had a way of nodding. That meant a decision was being made somewhere behind her eyes that the rest of you would simply have to live with. "I lost 3 people pulling you in here. I'll lose more before that thing's done coming for you. Some of mine are gonna say, I should have left you on the flats. She leaned back against the warm rock. You want to know why I won't? Cass waited. Because I'm 51 years old, Oba said. And I have spent every one of those years watching this world get smaller. Them taking it a piece at a time, a little less of us each season, and nothing, ever coming the other way. Trank, just subtraction. Ever. She nodded at Cass's belly, and something moved in her hard face that Cass hadn't thought was still in there. And then a woman walks into my canyon carrying addition. You understand me? For 19 years somebody finally walks in carrying a plus sign. Oba stood, joints cracking, her voice gone rough. I'll spend the whole cradle to keep that. Every container, every gun, every one of us. Because if we won't bleed for the one thing that's more of us instead of less, then they were right about us the whole time. Just stock. She left Cass by the fire. Edeline found her there, and Evan, and the feral 9-year-old crept up out of the dark and sat at a careful distance, watching Cass's belly like it was a thing that might at any moment perform a miracle. Which Cass supposed it was. Llewellyn came for the cradle 4 days later, and he brought the whole sky with him. He'd had to send for it. That was the only mercy in those 4 days. That a thing his size, calling down recyclers from a tower 300 kilometers off, could not simply appear. The Hesh moved, at the speed of their patience, and their patience, while enormous, was not infinite. He came back to the canyon mouth on the first day, alone, and sat his stolen cycle just outside the failing edge of the scatter field, and he did not attack. He waited, and he chimed, and his chiming reached down into the cradle, and found Cass wherever she was. A pressure behind the breastbone, patient and cold. Give me the process, it said, all day, all night. You prolong only the suffering of these units. Give me the process and the others will be processed in order, without priority. He thinks there's a manual, Evan said the second night, while the cradle turned containers into barricades. Like if he just gets the file, he can do it too. Maybe he can't help it, Cass said. She was huge now, and the drain had taken her grafted leg almost completely. She got around on a crutch Oba had cut for her. Maybe when you forget how to make things, the wanting doesn't go away. It just turns into taking. Maybe that's all he is. A 400,000-year-old want with no idea what it wants. On the third day, she made Evan take her up to the gantry, to the failing scatterfield generator. She'd been a line tech's daughter before she was anything else. And the Hesh had grafted enough of their own hardware into her that she could read their machines the way other people read faces. And the generator, she saw the moment she got close, was the wrong question. Everyone had been trying to keep it running. Keep the field up, stay hidden, last another season. Llewellyn already knew exactly where they were. Hiding was over. The scatter field. That cobbled, truck-sized engine that smeared their hum into the noise of the earth was the most powerful piece of Hesh resonance tech for 100 kilometers. And all this time they had been using it to whisper. Cass put her hand on its sparking housing and thought about the sorting light. The patient blue column. The way the dune had come apart thread by thread. The Hesh took the world apart by making matter want to leave itself. By singing every atom its own name until it let go. Harvest was resonance. And resonance, her father used to say with his hands deep in some dead engine, is just a song loud enough to break what's listening. Evan, she said, what happens if we stop whispering? What happens if we take this thing, and instead of smearing their song, we sing it back at them? Louder. All of it. Every name at once. Evan was quiet for a long time. Up at the canyon mouth, Llewellyn's chiming pressed at her breastbone. Patient, cold, certain. Cook every Hesh that heard it, Evan said slowly. And this generator, and the gantry, and anybody standing on it. He swallowed. The scar at his throat moved, and it'd take a while to charge. You'd have to hold the canyon long enough to get it loud. And somebody'd have to be up here at the end to let it go by hand. The timing's too fine to trust to a circuit. Somebody who can feel when it's loud enough. He looked at her belly and at her ruined leg, and his face did a terrible thing. Only 2 people in this canyon can feel that, Cass. And one of 'em's about to be busy. The Hesh came down at dawn with the sun behind them, because even a thing 400,000 years old will take a small, cruel edge if it's offered. There were more than Cass could count. The tower had sent its whole harvest train, recyclers in formation, skimmers folding out of the burnt sky, the air going thick with the chiming. The great chord of the Hesh resonance bending down toward the cradle to sing it apart ring by ring. At canyon mouth, Llewellyn rose off his stolen cycle for the first time. In days, his oil-slick weather moving fast and hungry now, the patience finally spent. And the cradle fought him. Cass saw it in pieces, the way you see anything that big and that fast. She was up on the gantry by then, with Evan and the screaming generator, charging the field by hand, feeding it everything the cradle had. Every cell, every cable, the cook fires gone dark so their power could feed the song. Oba held the second ring with her rail rifle and a line of welded containers, and when the first recycler came over the lip, she put a slug through its internal weather, and it fell still and beautiful and dead. And when the second came, she did it again, fought beside her with coil guns and harpoons, and one with nothing but a length of rebar. He drove into a skimmer's seam as it lifted him into the sorting light, so that the skimmer and the man went up together and came apart in the air in a rain of glittering, facet, and red. They died in order. They did not die without priority. Every one of them cost the Hesh a piece of itself, because that was the secret the cradle had paid for. In 19 years of blood, you can kill them if you decide your own death is a price you've already paid and are simply waiting to spend. The flask went down the first ring before it broke. Cass saw that too, from above. A dented flask passed hand to hand among the defenders in the last quiet second before the timing hit, each of them taking a pull and a breath and a half-smile and passing it on, an old human ritual older than the whole ledger. The last man drank and tucked it into his coat over his heart, as if it could stop anything. And then the wave came, and Cass made herself look back at the generator. "Louder," she told Evan. "It's not loud enough, louder." It was Oba who fell first of the ones whose names Cass knew. She held the second ring long past when she should have pulled back, because pulling back meant the third ring, and the third ring meant the rings where the children were. And Oba had decided some time ago that the math of her own life had a simple answer she'd already written down. A recycler broke through on her flank, and she turned to meet it, and it caught her in the edge of its sorting light. And Cass, up on the gantry, saw the tall, white-haired woman who had walked out onto the flats to die, well begin to come apart at the edges, sand slow, thread by thread, lifting. Oba did not scream. She got her rail rifle up, one-armed, against the pull of the light that was already taking her other arm, and she put her last slug into the recycler's weather at point-blank range. And it died, and the sorting light died with it. And she dropped back to the slag in pieces, but on her own terms. And the third ring held because she'd bought it the half-second it needed. The feral 9-year-old, the youngest, the last child born in the valley before the silence, was the one who dragged Oba's rifle back behind the barricade so it wouldn't be lost. "It's enough," Evan said. "Cass, it's enough. Any more and it cooks before we can aim it. It's loud enough. It's ready." The generator was a white roar now, a thing screaming the inverted harvest song back up its own throat. Every name at once. The field that had hidden them for decades wound to the edge of becoming a weapon that would unmake every Hesh inside the canyon, and the gantry with it, and the generator with it, and anyone standing on the gantry with it. And that was when the second pulse, the small fast bird's heart pulse that had drunk Cass's body down to a crutch and a ruined leg, decided that it was done waiting too. Pain folded her over the generator housing. She knew what it was. Edeline had warned her it might come early, that the drain and the running and the terror could bring it on. And here it was, arriving in the middle of the end of the world with the catastrophic bad timing of all new life everywhere. She got down off the housing because she couldn't stand. Evan caught her. Below them the cradle was 3 rings gone and dying, and Llewellyn was coming up through the throat of it. Vast and oil-slick, and finally hungry without patience, climbing the terraces toward the gantry, toward toward the missing entry in his ledger. "Get Edeline," Cass said, through her teeth. "Get her up here now. Cass, the field." "I'm gonna let it go," she said. "I'm the only one left who can feel when it's loud enough, so I'll do it." "Not yet." She grabbed his collar, the scar where the Hesh had owned him, and pulled his face down to hers. "Go get the doctor, and get down off this gantry, and you take that flask off that dead man, and you live, Evan. You live, and you tell them there was addition." You tell them somebody walked in carrying a plus sign. Now go. She had the baby on the gantry, in the screaming white light of the weapon, with the world ending below her and a 400,000-year-old hunger climbing the terraces to take it. Edeline came. Of course she came. She'd promised to deliver one live thing before she died. And she was not a woman who broke promises even to the apocalypse. She came up the gantry against everything sensible and got down in the roar and the heat, with her old hands sure and steady, and talked Cass through it the way women have talked women through it, since before there were stars to keep ledgers under, low and certain, and human under the chiming of the dying sky. And Cass, holding the generator's release in one hand, and the edge of the gantry in the other, hung between letting the song go and ending it all, and holding on one more second, one more. Because a person could not be born into a finished world. Somewhere in the bottom of herself where the Hesh had never reached, she found a thing to hold on to. She started to hum. It was a tune her mother had hummed, working the salvage, before the rot took her. Cass didn't know the words. There had never been words, just the shape of it. A low rising thing her mother made in her chest when her hands were busy and her mind was far away. Cass hummed it now over the roar, hummed it down at the small fast pulse, hummed it the way her mother had, the way her mother's mother must have all the way back, a song with no entry in any ledger. A frequency that had hummed in human chests since before the Hesh first weighed a world and found it wanting. She hummed and she bore down, and the weapon screamed, and Llewellyn came up over the lip of the gantry. 4 meters of glittering hunger, his oil-slick weather moving faster than she had ever seen it reaching. And the baby drew breath and cried. Cry was small. Against the roar of the weapon and the chiming of the sky it should have been nothing, a thread, a thing the world ate without noticing. Llewellyn stopped. Cass was watching him. She had been watching him climb, even through the worst of it. Some animal part of her had refused to look from the thing that wanted to open her up and read the missing instructions. So she saw it happen. She saw the cry reach him. She saw the ceaseless internal weather of his thinking, the light that moved facet to facet, that had not truly stopped in 400,000 years. She saw it stagger. He had come for a process. He had believed, all this time, with the unshakable certainty of a thing that had catalogued the universe, that there was a fireable, a recoverable, refinable thing that could be cut out of her and filed under its proper heading and used. He had believed that making was just a kind of taking he hadn't decoded yet, and now there was a new voice in the world. It had not been refined out of anything. It had not been recovered. It was off-ledger, impossible, a frequency that had not existed a second before and existed now, that Cass had made out of her own ruined body, out of nothing he could weigh, a plus sign in 400,000 years of subtraction. He could not value it. His whole self was a system for assigning value, and the new voice had none he could assign. It was simply more, the universe somehow containing more than it had a moment ago, and the contradiction reached down into the 400,000-year-old machinery of him and found the one gear that had no name. 1 human second. The oldest hunger in the valley stood on a gantry at the end of the world and listened to a thing it could never, ever do, and the listening stopped it cold. That was the second Cass had been holding on for. You wanted the process, she said. She didn't know if he could hear her over the roar. She didn't care. She wanted it said. Here it is. Watch close. She lifted the baby up against her chest with her bad arm, the crying red impossible new person, and with her good hand she let the weapon go. We make more, and you take everything, and we still make more. Her thumb came off the release. And that's how you lose. The song went up. Not the harvest song, the taking song, the patient blue column that sang an its name until it let go. The inverse. Every name at once. Sung back, sung up, sung into the lattice of every Hesh in the canyon. The recyclers picking through the dead rings, the skimmers folding out of the sky. The great cord of the harvest train bent down over the cradle and into the 4-meter oil-slick hunger standing arm's length from Cass. With its weather stopped cold around, a sound it could not file. The Hesh broke the way a struck glass breaks. All at once and beautifully and without any sound human ears could hear. Only a pressure, a single enormous chord that was the whole harvest's own song, turned around and driven back down its own throat. and the internal weather of every one of them blazed up white and shattered, facet from facet. From facet 400,000 years of patient hunger coming apart into glittering dust that hung in the dawn light and then gently began to fall. Llewellyn was the last. Cass watched him go. His weather had stopped early, around the baby's cry, and so the song found him already still, already caught on the gear with no name. And when the white bloomed up through him, it did so slow, almost gentle. Just a moment before he came apart, his glittering bulk threw her own reflection back at her 100 times over. Her and the baby, 100 small Casses, holding 100 small impossible new voices. And then the reflection shattered too, and the oldest hunger in the valley fell down around her in a soft bright rain, and was at last subtracted from the world. The generator went with it. Evan had been right. The gantry cooked. Cass was already moving, already throwing herself and the baby off the edge and down into the arms of the people below. Evan's arms scarred his throat, flask over his heart, alive, because she had told him to be, and the gantry went up in white behind them, and the canyon rang like a struck bell. And then, for the first time in 19 years, in the whole dead valley, there was quiet. Quiet, and a baby crying, and the dust of the entire HFY harvest train drifting down through the dawn like the first snow of a world that had decided against everything to keep going. They counted the dead for 2 days. There were so many. Oba, the gunner from the junk cart, the man who'd driven rebar into a skimmer seam, more than half the cradle, gone, lifted, filed, and now unfiled, their atoms drifting back down as glittering dust to mix with the slag they died on. Cass walked the rings on her crutch with the baby bound to her chest and learned the names she could, late, too late, and said them out loud so the saying would be in the world. Because that was a thing humans did that the ledger never had. We keep the names. Farrell, 9-year-old, the last child born before the silence, would not leave the baby's side. She'd appointed herself something, guard or older sister to the second person ever born in her lifetime. And she carried Oba's rail rifle everywhere now, too big for her, and dared anyone to say a word about it. Nobody did. Edeline lived. She'd gotten off the gantry in time, dragged down by Evan in the last seconds, and now she sat in the warm bottom ring with her old, sure hands and looked at the baby a great deal, and cried more than she'd admit. Just in 19 years, she kept saying, like she was checking it was still true. In 19 years. Not the last, though, Cass said. That's the thing about a plus sign, Doc. You can do it more than once. They did not know whether more HFY would come. There was a whole sky out there, and somewhere past the burnt edge of it, more towers, more ledgers, more patient hunger, weighing worlds and finding them wanting. Let them come, Cass thought, with the baby asleep on her chest and its small fast pulse no longer drinking her down, but simply beating alongside her own. Them send 1,000. Because subtraction has a bottom and addition does not. The HFY had built their whole vast civilization on the belief that everything could be counted, recovered, refined, that nothing, anywhere, ever, could simply be more than it was the moment before. A dying woman with a ruined leg and her mother's wordless song had proven them wrong on a gantry at the end of the world, and the proof was sleeping on her chest right now. Breathing, impossible, off every ledger that had ever been. Cass kissed the top of the small warm head and hummed the tune with no words. The one that went all the way back and out past the canyon mouth, the first green thing in 19 years, pushed up through the cooling slag toward a sun that for once had nothing aimed at it. The world was still mostly ruin. There was so much gone that would never come back, but there was more of them now than there had been. And tomorrow there would be more still.